Hi, welcome to the Average Man's Spiritual Quest, where ordinary people like you and me try to think about spiritual questions objectively, like jurors in a jury trial. I'm your host, Benedict. Today, let's think about the psychics. You know, the people some of us sometimes go to and ask about what will happen to us in the future or who the right guy or gal might be for us. This is a vast field that involves paranormal abilities like telepathy, telekinesis, clairvoyance, exorcism, and spirituality, culture, history, psychology, maybe even brain science. But of course, we're not scholars. We are here as jurors. So today, let's focus specifically on fortune telling. In this defamation trial that we're sitting in as jurors, it just began. The lawyers just finished delivering their opening statements. Plaintiff claims that fortune telling is real, and defendant argues that it is hogwash. The plaintiff, a fortune teller, brought this lawsuit because the defendant called him a fraud. Now it's up to us, jurors. So what are the fortune tellers saying as to how they see the future? Are they able to puncture the membrane, if you will, separating our three-dimensional physical world, which we can perceive through our five senses, and the other side, the next dimension, the spirit domain, God's abode, whatever you want to call it, to steal a glimpse of the future there, or even communicate with the other side? First thing first, though. For someone to be able to tell future events, the future must be set rather than fluid or undetermined, right? This much makes logical sense, no? Okay then, this is the beginning point of our inquiry as jurors. Of course, we're talking the age-old question of determinism versus free will. Let's first think about our personal observations of the life stories of ourselves and those around us. You know, the older we get, the more we think we see a pattern emerging out of such stories. We find it more and more difficult to shake off the feeling that it was all meant to be. Like, oh my God, had I not missed that airport limo and gotten on that flight, I would have been killed in the airplane crash, and that means I would never gotten married and had my son, who is now the President of the United States. Or I met my ex-wife who utterly destroyed my 20s, and as a result I never got on the career path that I deserved, and here I am, a bitter old man. You know, thoughts like those. And the more thoughts like these you accumulate as you grow old, the more you feel that you see inevitability behind those bends and curves in the course your life has taken, like a river flowing through its course. But then, a counter-argument is that the data you are thinking about are all in the past, and that's the only reason that fools you into thinking that you see a certain inexorable pattern. I hate this counter-argument, and I don't have one iota of psychic ability to rebut it with. Darn it. Nevertheless, it appears that humanity has always felt this quite intuitively, both in the East and the West. But our own experiences, intuitive or otherwise, is not something we jurors can consider as evidence, right? Well then, just how are we jurors supposed to think about this issue? We need some testimony from expert witnesses. We need some guidance, some education. You know, expert witnesses, like doctors hired by lawyers in a trial to provide medical analysis and opinion, of course in support of his client's claim. Let's see what philosophers and scientists over the millennia have had to say, both from the East and the West. The fact that many of us feel in our guts as we grow older that there appears to be a predestined course of our lives is probably a universal experience, and probably explains why both the Eastern and the Western civilizations have been preoccupied with the philosophical question of destiny, fate, a certain predetermined course or even pattern, if you will. Speaking of patterns, if destiny or determinism imply patterns, making fortune-telling possible, we need to hear from expert witnesses on patterns. this could be interesting. I'm sure you have heard about the mysterious mathematical patterns all around us. How about the Fibonacci sequence? This sequence is seen in nature all around us, like our fingerprint, flowers, animals. Mathematicians also tell us that the stripes on a zebra are governed by mathematical patterns. Also with leopards. Oh, did you know that rivers meandering through a landscape follow a mathematical pattern too? I'm not kidding. Huh? It is called river fractals in mathematics. Many consider these mathematical patterns the definitive proof of the existence of God. It goes something like this. Yeah, we know dinosaur bones and evolution is probably real, but evolution follows these patterns? That cannot be the works of only the survival of the fittest idea. It must be by divine design. Well, yeah, I kind of see the point. But the million-dollar question for us jurors, though, is this. If patterns are everywhere, why not in the course of our lives? If so, maybe someone with psychic powers can detect it somehow, thereby telling the future. Next, let's hear from some philosopher expert witnesses. You know, in the West, some of the earliest philosophical works of the ancient Greeks were about destiny. Democritus, a near contemporary of Socrates, that's around the time of the Greco-Persian War. You know the movie 300 with Gerard Butler as King Leonidas of Sparta running around half naked and making a last stand at the seaside choke point of Thermopylae, thus saving the Western civilization from Persia, a superpower of the East at the time? Anyhow, Democritus and his mentor Leucippus are considered the earliest determinists. They are famous for coming up with the idea that all things in the universe are made up of atoms. Yeah, you heard me right, atoms. These guys thought about atoms 2,500 years ago. And natural law governs all atoms, and therefore all things are predetermined. We humans do not alter things with our free will, if you will. Then came along Epicurus, a generation later, the champion of Stoicism, and Lucretius in the 1st century BCE, and argued that there is such a thing as randomness, and this randomness gives us free will. Of course, I am grossly simplifying things. We jurors want just what we need, no more. Since then, as Christianity established itself, starting some 2,000 years ago, and this concept of free will really came into vogue. Nearly all early Christian fathers rejected the notion of determinism, under which fortune-telling is possible, and taught free will, under which fortune-telling is not possible. In a sense, free will doctrine is absolutely essential to justify two central elements in Christianity. Number one, God wants us to believe and love Him voluntarily, not like robots. What would be fun in that? And second, God's punishment by sending us down to hell to burn alive without dying or passing out forever and ever. Well, if we don't have free will, we're not responsible, and God would be roasting alive innocent people, wouldn't He? But then, the titan among the early church theologians, Augustine of Hippo, threw in a monkey wrench into the debate. He changed his position sort of late in his life from free will to something like, we have no free will to believe in God until God gives us grace to do so. Then we sort of exercise free will and accept or reject God. And this thought was later picked up by John Calvin, you know, the Calvinist church around the corner, at the time of the Reformation. Known as divine predestination, whether a person will be saved or not is predetermined by God, and only God knows it. In more recent times, Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher in the late 19th century, said something to the effect that there is no such thing as free will, and Christianity built on free will is nonsense. As to the details of these arguments, let's not even go there. We're jurors, not philosophers. Well, are you confused yet? Our experts can't agree on anything. What good are they as expert witnesses in this trial? To me, absolutely nothing. In the meantime, in the East, They went quite a bit further and wrote I Ching, commonly known in the West as the Book of Changes. It originates from the Zhou period in China, about 800 BCE. For us ordinary people, though, it is basically a hugely complex system that's meant to reflect the cosmological pattern that governs us all. It was later incorporated into Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, especially as a guide for moral conduct. But for many ordinary Asian people, it is used as a tool for fortune-telling. And there are other Asian systems like Myeongnihak of Korea and etc. There are many others. It's easy for us ordinary people to think of them as huge body of statistical information, but I'm told that it is really a treatise on the cosmological pattern. Maybe sort of like the Fibonacci sequence and the river fractals that we talked about. Now let's consider what the fortune tellers themselves have to say. I've talked to a number of fortune tellers and looked into their practices both in America and Korea, and here's what I have heard so far. The Eastern fortune tellers can generally be classified into two categories. First, there are those who rely solely on what the spirits that inhabit their minds and bodies tell them. They are sort of like possessed. When a spirit decides on a person to be its medium, it tries to enter the medium's body and demand, one way or the other, that the unfortunate selectee lives a life of a medium. At this stage, most hapless selectees resist. I mean, think about it. Would you like it if a spirit, I'm sure very scary at first, keeps bothering you and tries to take over your life and turn you into a fortune teller? When the selectee resists, the spirit usually makes the person very ill. And the doctors usually have no idea what the hell is wrong with them. Eventually, the selectee relents and walks the life of a fortune teller and or exorcist. A spirit medium, I think that's the more officially acceptable title for them. By the way, there's the word shamans, but I don't know if this word reflects any racist element, but I've never heard a white American spirit medium being called shamans. Have you? Oh, they're called mudang in Korean, by the way. The second type. There are those who insist that they are not scary mudangs, but they rely solely on I Ching or Myeongnihak or other such time-honored pattern recognition systems, and therefore they are more scientific and rational. But then, even among those who rely on such systems, many will confide in you in hushed voices that unless you have a certain psychic, supernatural, extrasensory abilities, you really can't interpret these systems to any degree of reliability. Okay, how about in America, where the official terminology for fortune telling is apparently divination? First, we have all seen or at least heard about the use of crystal balls, tarot cards, horoscope using the astrological charts, and other such systems. And then there are those who use no such systems but claim that they rely totally on their supernatural ability to access the other side, the spiritual domain, the spiritual dimension. But unlike with Korean mudangs, the stories of the selectee fighting to ward off the spirit that is trying to turn you into a shaman or getting very ill in the process are not often heard of. There is also one other big difference between the Korean mudangs and American mystics. Many American spirit mediums, or at least the ones that I came across, claim that they are accessing the spiritual domain of God and Jesus Christ, that they are Christians. Well-known examples would be Edgar Cayce, you have all heard of him, maybe we'll visit him in a future video, and Sylvia Browne, a famous American psychic medium who passed away in 2013. For example, Sylvia Browne's professed Christianity is a curious mixture of the East and the West, like Christianity, Buddhism, and Hinduism. I didn't say bad, I said curious. For instance, Sylvia Browne believed in, or rather knew, because she could see it, that first, we live many lives. I'm talking about samsara, reincarnation, as in Hinduism. Two, Our souls and bodies carry over memories of traumas from past lives. 3. We are to learn life lessons during each of our lifetimes so that we can evolve as spirits. 4. The other side is right next to us, except it is in a different dimension, and it is where we go in between our lives. And 5. And it is a place full of God's infinite unconditional love, who does not judge us, period. Of course, there are many other aspects of her belief system. Maybe we could revisit her in a later video. Yeah, but it would really help if we are given some statistical evidence on probability regarding fortune telling, i.e., how often are they right? Isn't that what we jurors ultimately want to know? Well, this is where we jurors come up against a blank wall. I'm not aware of any legitimate scientific investigation conducted on this question. There's such a thing as predictive analytics, but that's statistical analysis, not how often fortune-telling predictions are right or wrong. So let me offer what I sort of figure on this. I know. I'm a fellow juror and I'm not supposed to offer anything that smells like evidence, but in the absence of any probability data, well, this is it. In my experiences with both American and Korean fortune tellers, I give it approximately 60% maybe likelihood of their fortune telling to come true. Even then though, the predicted time frame may be off by months or even years, and not all the details predicted turn out to make sense. Of course, the mediums themselves often give a disclaimer that they cannot be 100% accurate because they have to interpret the information that gushes into their minds from the other side, with the interpretation itself being either his own human thinking or itself divinely inspired, maybe. So a vague sort of like out-of-focus TV sets from before the era of cable TV, sort of around 60%. Is that credible enough to think, yeah, fortune telling is real? I don't know. But what I certainly do know is that I cannot dismiss it as nonsense or fraud, especially in view of the fact that some of the shamans or mediums I have known are some of the most sincere, wise, and devout in whatever religion they practice people I know. Before we close this jury deliberation session, I offer one final expert witness. Please watch a YouTube video by German theoretical physicist Dr. Sabine Hossenfelder. She argues that free will is incompatible with the laws of nature as understood through quantum physics, Einsteinian physics, and the emerging gravitational physics. I provided the link below, and it's food for thought for all of us jurors. Thank you. I'll see you next time.